everybody. Welcome to Celebrity Encounters Podcast. I am Harlan, and of course,
I'm Alan.
And we have a very special guest with us today. Not to say that we don't, all our guests are special, but I think this one's pretty special. And by the way, shout out to Jerry McCambridge for allowing us to do the Celebrity Edition. Jerry, unfortunately, and his co-host Jacqueline couldn't be here today. So
you're stuck with Alan and Harlan.
And as you can see, we have Eric Singer from Kiss, our guest today, amongst many other different fabulous bands. Eric, what's happening?
How are you guys doing?
We know that you've had many celebrity encounters because first off, as a young man, you were with your dad's band doing big band music, and he was doing all the big celebrities back in the day. And then your whole career, at some point or another, you're going to bump into everybody. But today, who are you sharing your encounter with?
Mick Jagger.
What? Mick Jagger?
Mick Jagger and Jeff Beck, because they were together.
Wow.
Oh.
What happened was I had just come off of tour. I had been on, this was 1987, the fall of 87. So I'm living in LA. I had just come off tour playing with Gary Moore, the guitar player. And, but anyway, somebody called me and go, "Hey, Eric, are you interested in being in a Mick Jagger video?" And I go, "Yeah." He goes, "Oh," they said, "Come down to the studio, bang, right away." So I got dressed and went down there right away. And I get down there and they tell me it was for Mick Jagger and Jeff Beck. So they had a drum kit in the room. So I kind of went up, and the drum set was just by itself, no other equipment, no other instruments or musicians. And I set up drums, get ready. And then Mick Jagger shows up with Jeff Beck. And they had Mick Jagger.
Wait. At this point in your career, was this like a big deal, or was this more of like, hey, I'm accomplished and this is just another cool thing in my hat?
Well, I'd say a combination of both.
Okay.
Because of course it was a cool thing. It was Mick Jagger and Jeff Beck, who I was a big Jeff Beck fan. I had, listened to him when I was younger and bought the records, and he had gone on to become, very, very, very respected in the fusion and jazz world, because he kind of switched to that style of music when he did the Blow by Blow album, which ironically, at that time period, mid-70s, Jeff Beck was really big because George Martin, the Beatles producer, produced that album and the next one, Wired. Both of them were platinum albums.
Right.
So that was the biggest success he ever had, was working with George Martin. And so he was, obviously, everybody knew who he was. And, his nickname was always called the Governor. All the British guitar players, even they always looked at him as being like the king of the hill. He was the top guy by all his peers. So, but of course, Mick Jagger goes without saying. The Rolling Stones, and he's one of the biggest lead singers in the history of rock and roll, and they're still around today.
Yeah, that's unbelievable. And I hear their performances still hold up.
I saw them at Allegiant Stadium, whatever it was, like 2 years ago now.
Right.
They were great. It was great.
He's been the lead singer. He's been the lead singer for the Rolling Stones since 1962.
Okay, I was born then.
So he's been singing a long time.
Wow.
And he's still
Well, he's
performing.
he's one of the greatest frontmen entertainers. I mean, people have come and gone throughout his life. Because you're talking 1962. Think about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they come and gone, but yet he has always, I look at people that have longevity. You're a survivor, because part of it is surviving the business and all that comes with it. That's at least what I've learned from my experience. So I can only imagine what it's like for somebody like him. In the beginning, they were like a white boy blues band. Anyways, it's all blues cover songs. So, and they called it 10 by 5 because 10 songs by the 5 guys in the Rolling Stones. So they originally, before they wrote their own songs, they were doing just covers, and they were like, the blues and black and jazz was invented by black culture in America. It's an American thing, blues and jazz.
Yeah.
But basically, the ironic thing is, all those white boy British musicians took the black music and created their version of it, which became, kind of British invasion.
Right.
And they were all influenced by that music, even Led Zeppelin. You listen to the first album, some of those songs were old Howlin' Wolf songs that they, like Whole Lot of Love is I Need Love by, go look up the original version. You'll be like, oh yeah, they stole it and they got sued for it. But interesting thing is their interpretation of the English people doing blues influenced music created a new sound. It wasn't like people in America, white guys doing it. They, because being British, having a different culture and the accents and all that, their interpretation of it became its own thing. And obviously, and then it came back across the ocean. Everybody's, oh, I love all this stuff. Yeah, but it started here.
Yeah,
right.
It sure did.
It started here in your own backyard, but the African American culture, which they created it. Absolutely.
I have a question about, before you go on, I have a question about longevity, because it just dawned on me. When I first moved to Hollywood, a mentor of mine said, hey, Harlan, every year 10,000 new people come to Hollywood to try to make it. Actors, writers, producers, directors, what have you. And that same year, 9,999 leave the business, whether it was 1 year, 10 years, or 15 years. And of course, she said to me as a young buck, what are you going to be? And of course, I was like, well, I'm going to be one of those guys, And I look back, and the fascinating part is, like, I had this peer group in my early days. There were about 40 of us, and there was only 2 of us left in the business. They've all left. In music, is it the same kind of a situation that occurs there, where it's a rotation of people in and out, or how?
I would say probably very similar. When I moved to LA, which was late '83, the scene, that was the place to be in the world. A lot of people, of course, London's always been cool in New York, and Chicago, other cities, but LA was happening at that time, the '80s hair metal thing, or whatever you want to call it. That was definitely blowing up big time. So people came from all over the world. That's one thing I remember. People from Sweden, Europe, Germany, whatever, Latin America, whatever, all were coming to LA trying to make it, to get in the music business. And a lot of people, it's rarefied air to have any kind of success in that field. When you really look at it, especially in retrospect, I realize that I'm very fortunate and very blessed to be able to have survived and have a career. But part of it isn't just having some ability or talent. It's also figuring out those survival tactics. How can I hang and stay in this game and make it work for me in some way? And then I think another part of this, you have to keep your ego in check, because you have to realize you may not be the guy, but you could, like I always tell people, I don't get to be the king when I played in Kiss with Gene and Paul, but guess what? I eat with the king. I travel with the king. I sit next to the king at when we eat. I do everything with him. I just don't get to be the king, but I get, so it's not a bad thing to be part of a successful thing. And as long as you're cool with that, but you have to start somewhere. And part of the learning curve is, they have the 10,000 hours rule, some people think, but the more you can learn to do every facet of a particular thing, it's going to give you a lot of insight and a lot of knowledge and wisdom to apply.
So what do you attribute your longevity in the music business? Because in my case, like the friend of mine, George, the reason that he's still in the business, he's the most likable human being on the planet. Like, everybody loves George. And so that's why he's still in business. For me,
I thought everybody loved Raymond
and George. They just left that out of the title. And for me, I think in my personality, organically, is no one tells me no. If you tell me no, I'm going to get a yes. It may not be today and tomorrow, that kind of stuff. I think that's my personality on that, of why I've had the length of career that I've had. Eric, what would you attribute for you of how you've lasted the length that you've lasted?
I think you have to have a bigger part of it rather than just the talent. It's like, I think, one thing I learned right away is pay attention all the time. Always be a peripheral listener and peripheral vision. Peripheral vision is you could be looking ahead, but you got to be aware of your surroundings, and then learn how to read the room with people, and learn how to develop some kind of understanding and instincts about, if somebody has a very alpha or ego-driven personality, you got to learn how to deal with that And because if you're going to get in conflicts about everything and argue about everything with people, you won't last. They always say if you want to do something your way, then go start your own band or go start your own business, make your own movies, make your own TV shows. You got to do it yourself if you want full control. But if you want to work with others, that's a skill. You have to learn people skills to be able to get along, be a good hang, be professional, always be on time, always be prepared, be ready. Don't be the guy that's causing the problems for the situation. Be the solution rather than the problem. A lot of people, at least from my experience, I've met a lot of people that are really talented, but they don't get it. Of the other aspects of what it takes to be in the business, I think
Oh
they
yeah,
look
there
at
were
it.
so many people way more talented and creative and dynamic than I was. That's for sure that, at some point they chose to call it quits. Yeah, I completely agree with you.
So now you're living out here. Kiss isn't touring anymore. Are you semi-retired? Do you
Yeah,
still play some
a little
gigs?
bit. I still play a little bit, but I just take life one day at a time because they say um, life's what happens while you're making plans. So no matter what you plan, I
That's a
think
good
John
one.
Lennon said that, or he's attributed with that that quote, and it's true. So if you just take, I'm trying to, it's an ongoing, forever process, but it's kind of like learn to live in the moments, not yesterday or tomorrow, because like they say, yesterday's gone, tomorrow you don't know what it may or may not bring. So I'm trying to learn to just live one day at a time, stay in the moment, just do whatever. Um,
So
and
going back to your story, stuff happens. Continuing your story, Mick Jagger comes into the room. You had started to say before we interrupted you.
Okay, so I set up the drums. He comes in, so he actually walked over to me, and they started playing the song through the PA. And he came over just talking. He said, "Hey, how you doing?" He's really like just how we're talking now. He was the exact same way, and he's actually talking and coaching me through the song and the arrangement. Okay, here's this part. Now this change comes up and it goes to this. And he's telling me this as we're listening. Now, Jeff Beck, he stood over by the monitor desk and didn't say anything. So then he goes, okay, they played it for me once or twice, and he just kind of gave me the roadmap, if you will. So I got behind the drum. They wanted to just see how I was going to play the song and how I looked because it was for a video. And they were going to film the video that night at the Country Club, which was a well-known rock club in Reseda, in the valley, the San Fernando West Valley. And I had actually lived there before, so I used to go there all the time. It was one of my hangouts a few years before that, and so I played a couple times, and then they came up and came around the drums and started asking me questions. And that's when Jeff Beck came over, and I remember it always stood out to me because he asked me, "Oh, who have you played with?" And I said, and I told him, I played with Lita Ford and Black Sabbath at that time. And I said I just got off tour with Gary Moore, and he goes, "Oh," I'm like, "I don't know who that is." And I go, I remember it struck me as so odd. I said to him, I go, "Really?" I go, I said, "You don't know who he is?" I go, like, he's like a big fan of yours. And I mean, anyone that knew Gary Moore in England, you knew who he was. Because he was very well respected and he was very influenced by Jeff Beck. In fact, I could play you some stuff and compare it, and you'd be like, "Oh, that sounds like Jeff Beck." Well, duh.
Trippy.
Um, but it was weird that he said he didn't know who Gary Moore was. And I thought that was odd. I don't know if he was just being coy, whatever. I got the impression that maybe he was a little aloof, shy kind of guy in some ways until he gets comfortable. I don't know. So, anyways, I played. And they said, "Okay, cool." And so when I got home, they called me and said, "Okay, they're going to send over a cassette so you can learn the song, and they want you to come down to the country club tonight around 8 or 9 o'clock, whatever." They gave me a rough time. So I started listening to the tape because that's how you had to do it, and trying to learn the arrangement of the song and stuff. And then they called me and they called me a little bit later and said, "Oh, well, they're running behind a little bit." They said they're trying two different drummers, you and this other guy, and so they're going to have you come down later and do the video later. And then they called me again and said they kept pushing the tie back. Then eventually they called me and said, "Okay, they're just going to use the other guy. You don't need to come down." They decided they're just going to use the other guy. So I said, "Can I ask you who it is?" They go, "Terry Bozzio, who was a very famous drummer." who played with Frank Zappa and Missing Persons with his wife. That was a band that most people knew him for, if you didn't know him from Frank Zappa. But he's a very, very, very well-respected killer drummer. So I didn't feel so bad. I'm like, well, they ain't a bad guy to lose the gig to. And the weird thing is, though, I didn't know it after they did that. That was just for a video, for a performance, like an MTV type video. After that, they ended up hiring Terry Bozzio to be in the band to go to Japan with Mick Jagger.
Oh, wow.
But as it turns out, Jeff Beck didn't do the tour. Joe Satriani ended up playing guitar on that tour. But so it's kind of interesting in hindsight. That may or may not have led to me getting to, if I would have gotten the gig, I might have maybe ended up getting to play in Mick Jagger's band. I don't know. But either way, it was cool because like I said, you always have to take the half glass full attitude out of stuff. And I thought, well, I got to meet Mick Jagger and Jeff Beck, and those are two people that I'm big fans of and that I respect highly, and as most people do. And ironically, years later, when I was playing with Alice Cooper, we got to open up for the Rolling Stones for 3 shows. They were doing stadiums, imagine that. And I remember the one gig, it was up in Canada with Kanye West. He played before us, actually, before Alice Cooper. And so I got a picture before they went on stage. We went and hung out in their dress. There was like 2 backstage VIP areas, one for certain guests, but then there was the inner sanctum one where the actual band guys would be hanging out before the show. So we were hanging out with Ronnie Wood and Charlie Watts and those guys and Keith Richard. And basically they were waiting for Mick. So they don't go on stage until Mick runs the show.
Sure.
And he runs the band money-wise. So he went to college for, I think, finance. So he knows his stuff and he runs the band. So when they're ready to go on stage, Mick goes and does cardio for like 45 minutes or an hour.
What?
With a trainer. Yeah. He does cardio because once you do cardio, anyone that's done any cardio, after you're done, what do? Now you got all these endorphins and you're all energized, right? And you're really and he's warmed up. So he would go and do cardio. When he's ready to go, he shows up. I remember we were standing there with Alice Cooper in the band and the rest of the Stones. Mick comes walking up with that trainer, had a long trench coat on. And he goes, hey, how y'all doing and stuff? We take a photo, boom, then they all follow him, they go right to stage and he goes right on. And then you wonder, when you see the Stones and you see how Mick Jagger from the get-go, he comes out of the gate and he's on 10, running up and down the ego ramps and all that stuff. Now you know why, because he's already pumped up and ready to go. And he's in great shape. I mean, he was ripped, like great shape. And that was like 2008, I think, at that point. So that was like 18 years ago. And, and when they would play, I would go out in the audience, because I always looked at going to concerts as like going to school. It's always an education. You can learn what to do and what not to do. You can always take something away from every concert experience. You might see a drummer go, oh, I like the way he does that, or that's a cool lick, or I like the thing he does visually. And, you steal these little things. And then I always tell everybody, take all the stuff, throw it into the pot, and you make your own soup, and that becomes who you are. And so there's always something to be taken away. But the big thing I took away from Mick Jagger was like, this guy's the best front man. And people have come and gone through the years where they might have looked like they kind of got ahead of him for a little bit. They took the lead. And, when David Lee Roth came on the scene in 1978, everybody goes, oh, there's a new king in town. The thing I learned taking away from that whole experience, getting to meet him and then play on the same bill with him, I'm like, this guy is the epitome of what a rock star is. And there's a reason why he's one of the greatest of all time, because he's always somehow stayed relevant his whole career.
Yeah, and he's in his 80s now.
That's unbelievable.
I'll leave you with this thought at the very end. In the beginning, when the Stones started, the beginning early days of rock and roll, nobody knew how long you would be in a band or what the longevity or lifespan was going to be of anybody.
Right.
And he made a famous phrase when they were in their 20s. They said, do you think you'll still do this when you turn 30? Because that was considered old. It's always been a young man's game. And he said, well, as long as we still have teenage frames, meaning as long as we're thin and look young like boys, teenage frames. That was a famous saying that he said. In fact, my friend had a band in LA. They called it Teenage Frames after that quote Mick Jagger. And here we are. Mick Jagger's what, 80 or something now?
Yeah, he's in his 80s now.
So there you go. You never know. But he's a great example to follow, that it's really about, as long as you can deliver the songs and deliver the goods, you can hang.
Well, see, those teenage frames he had when he started, those people are now in their 60s and 70s. They still have their teenage frames. It's just aged.
Oh, absolutely. Well, and quite honestly, it goes back to what we have talked with Eric before. Quality in music lasts forever.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And the music that they had, that they made 30, 40 years ago, still holds up completely today.
Harlan,
Staying power.
You can have guys that are great, like technical musicians or brilliant musicians on an instrument, but ultimately, most people don't understand a lot of that, those nuances. They understand if you can tap your foot or move to the music and has a memorable hooky melody that you can sing along, that's what stays with people. The power of music is somehow what people can find it relatable, and it can touch them some way.
I just wonder if somebody like Taylor Swift, when she becomes 60s or 70s or 80s, will still be relevant.
It's a good question. I don't know.
Well, every generation has their music. There's some people that I see make quotes like on Facebook or something, be like, "Oh, I love the '80s. I miss it. That was the greatest music ever." Not really. But mind you, of course, we both said I like the '60s and '70s. I think the music was better, mainly because every band sounded uniquely like themselves.
Yeah.
Where
right.
in the 80s, a band became popular, like let's say Motley Crue, and everyone's like, "Oh, they kind of remind me of Kiss." I thought the same thing when I first saw it. But then what happened in the business, just like movies, oh, we got to find a band that's like Motley Crue, or we got to make a movie that's like Jaws, or a movie that's like whatever's a popular movie.
Just so you all know, out in podcast world, Eric and I get into these very go down the rabbit hole conversations.
Deep discussion.
And on that note,
yes. Well, Eric, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. We'll see you again sometime soon.
All right, Alan. And at some point, Alan, I'm going to see if I can try to get Danny Seraphin to for you, if maybe try to see if you can get him on there. I think he'd be a good. You being from Chicago and having the roots, and you saw them when you were younger.
Oh yes.
And he's probably got some really great celebrity encounters, knowing that, because they played with Hendrix and all those
Absolutely.
guys.
That would be awesome. Thanks, Eric. I appreciate you.
Well, folks, it's been great. This is Alan.
I'm Harlan. Celebrity Encounters podcast out. Thanks for tuning in today. And if you enjoyed our show, please subscribe, rate, and review our podcast on all your favorite platforms. We'll see you next week with the next episode of Celebrity Encounter Podcast.